You think you know the shoe bomber story, right?
Hmm.
December 2001, Richard Reid tries to light explosives in shoes on a flight from Paris to Miami.
Right.
But what if I told you that was just the tip of the iceberg?
Okay.
We're going to dive deep into what really happened on American Airlines Flight 63
Okay.
and how it changed the world. Using your sources, of course.
Well, what's so fascinating is, even in its failure, Reid's story really reveals a lot about the evolving nature of terrorism,
Okay.
especially in those early post 9/11 years.
Yay.
It challenges our assumptions about what a terrorist looks like and how they operate.
Okay, so let's start right in the thick of it.
Yeah.
Flight 63, hundreds of passengers, holiday travel, probably a lot of excitement and anticipation in the air.
Yeah.
And then imagine the sheer terror when people start smelling smoke
Oh, gosh.
and they see Reid hunched over, fumbling with his shoes.
Oh, it was chaos. Thankfully, passengers and crew were able to overpower him before he could fully ignite the fuse.
But let's be clear, this wasn't just a guy with a few firecrackers.
Right.
Forensic analysis showed that the bomb, while crude in some ways, was absolutely capable of causing a catastrophic explosion.
Yeah, and that's what gets me.
Yeah.
We've all seen the images of those clunky shoes with the explosives packed in, almost comical,
Yeah.
right? But your sources mentioned that Reid's bomb utilized TATP and PETN.
Right.
Can you explain why those explosives are so scary?
Yeah.
Especially given the security measures back in 2001.
So TATP, trisotone triperoxide, is a powerful explosive that is notoriously difficult to detect,
Oh, wow.
even today.
Really?
It poses a significant challenge for airport security.
Wow.
And PDN, penterethyl tetranitrate, is another high explosive.
Okay.
Favored by terrorists because it can be molded into various shapes and concealed very easily.
Oh, wow.
Now, back then, there were no shoe scanners, no advanced trace detectors.
Right.
Reid's bomb would have sailed right through security. Makes you wonder if it wasn't for the damp fuse,
Right.
which your sources say was probably from a mix of sweat and rain. We might be talking about the Richard Reid tragedy instead of the Richard Reid incident.
Absolutely. And it gets even more unsettling when you consider this wasn't some impulsive act.
Right.
Your research indicates that Reid meticulously planned this attack, even conducting a reconnaissance mission months earlier.
Wait, a recon mission? Tell me more about that.
5 months before Flight 63, Reid flew El Al, the Israeli airline,
Okay.
known for its stringent security, to Tel Aviv. He was basically casing the joint, observing their security procedures, particularly how they screened shoes.
Oh, wow. So he was basically a terrorist in training, gathering intel for a future attack.
Essentially, yes.
That level of premeditation is chilling.
It is.
It makes you question that initial perception of him as a lone wolf,
Right.
just a troubled guy acting out.
Right. And that's where the case gets even more intriguing. While initial assumptions pointed to Reid being a lone actor,
Right.
forensic evidence later suggested otherwise.
Okay.
Traces of material from another person were found on the bomb, indicating that Reid wasn't working alone.
Hold on. So we're not just talking about a lone wolf here. Was he part of a bigger network?
The evidence points to a chilling possibility that Reid was part of a coordinated effort, perhaps even linked to the 9/11 attacks.
Mm-hmm.
Sources reveal a figure named Sajid Badat, who was essentially Reid's co-conspirator.
Wow, I've never even heard of this Badat guy before.
Yeah.
What's the connection?
Badat had a nearly identical shoe bomb and was trained alongside Reid in the same al-Qaeda camps in Afghanistan.
Wow.
He was supposed to carry out a similar attack on another transatlantic flight around the same time as Reid.
That completely changes the picture.
It does.
What happened to Badat? Did he succeed?
He backed out at the last minute, got cold feet.
Oh, wow.
But even though he didn't detonate his bomb, he was still convicted for his role in the conspiracy. And then there's the testimony of Zacarias Moussaoui, the so-called 20th hijacker.
Right.
He claimed that Reid was initially meant to be part of the 9/11 plot, although this has been disputed.
Yeah, okay. That's where it gets a little murky.
Right.
But regardless, the fact that Reid was connected to these individuals paints a very different picture than the lone wolf narrative.
It did.
But to understand how he became part of this web of extremism, we need to go back to the beginning.
Okay.
His childhood. You know, sources describe it as troubled, right?
Right.
Absent father, raised by his mom. In and out of trouble with the law from a young age.
Yeah.
Is that typical of the path to radicalization?
Well, it's not a simple equation.
Right.
A troubled background doesn't automatically equal a future terrorist.
Right.
But it can create vulnerabilities.
Right.
Leaving individuals searching for belonging purpose, something to believe in.
Yeah.
And that's where extremist ideologies can step in, offering a twisted sense of purpose and community.
Right, and that's what happened with Reid. Your sources detail his conversion to Islam while serving time at Feltham Young Offenders Institution.
That's right.
So prison, a place designed to rehabilitate, actually becomes a breeding ground for his extremism.
It's a disturbing thought, isn't it? It highlights how institutions can inadvertently become incubators for extremism if they don't address the underlying psychological and social needs of individuals.
Right.
And upon his release, Reid's journey into radical Islam deepened. He started attending mosques, first Brixton Mosque, which was considered moderate.
So not exactly a hotbed of radicalism?
No.
What happened there?
That's where he met Zacharias Moussaoui. Remember the supposed 20th hijacker?
Right, yeah.
Moussaoui was already deeply radicalized and was eventually expelled from the mosque for his extremist views.
Really?
But Reid was drawn to him, followed him to another mosque, Finsbury Park,
Right.
which at the time was notorious for its extremist preaching and connections to al-Qaeda.
Finsbury Park, led by Abu Hamza al-Masri, that place had a reputation, didn't it?
It did. It was considered a hub for radicalization,
Yes.
attracting vulnerable individuals like Reid.
Right.
It's a chilling example of how specific locations can become breeding grounds for extremist ideologies.
Right.
And they had a very specific recruitment method. They used what's called the infection model,
Okay.
targeting specific communities,
Okay.
focusing on vulnerable individuals, and strategically planting seeds of extremism.
So not just broadcasting a message of hate,
Right.
but strategically cultivating it within a community.
Right.
That's scary effective.
It is.
And for Reid, Finsbury Park was the fertile ground where those seeds took root and blossomed into something truly dangerous.
Precisely. He went from a petty criminal searching for meaning to a radicalized individual willing to die for a twisted cause.
Yeah.
And what's particularly concerning is that his case, while seemingly isolated, reveals a much larger and more complex network of extremism operating beneath the surface.
Okay, so we've gone from a seemingly simple story of a guy trying to light his shoes on fire to a web of international intrigue, radical mosques, and chilling connections to 9/11.
Yep.
It makes you wonder, was Richard Reid a pawn in a much larger game?
That's a question we'll delve into deeper in part 2, along with the psychological complexities that drove him to attempt this horrific act. We'll examine his motivations, the influence of ideology and group dynamics, and what his case reveals about the evolving face of terrorism in the 21st century. Welcome back to our deep dive into the Richard Reid case.
Yeah.
Last time we kind of established that there's a lot more to this story
Yeah.
than just a guy in a pair of exploding shoes.
Right.
We saw how Reid's attempted bombing, even though it failed,
Right.
exposed chilling vulnerabilities in airport security,
Yeah.
and hinted at a much wider network of extremism.
Yeah, it's a lot to process, and honestly, it's pretty unsettling.
It is.
So this time I think we need to go deeper.
Okay.
We need to understand the why behind Reid's actions. What would drive someone to try and blow up a plane full of people?
It's a difficult question.
Yeah.
And there's no easy answer.
Right.
But by examining the available evidence, psychological profiles, court records, and expert analysis,
Yeah.
we can gain some insights into Reid's mindset and the factors that led him down this path.
So where do we start? I mean, we talked about his troubled childhood, the time in prison.
Right.
Do those experiences really create a terrorist?
It's not that simple.
Okay.
It's more about vulnerability,
Okay.
a difficult childhood,
Right.
especially one marked by instability and a lack of positive role models,
Right.
can leave individuals searching for meaning, belonging, a sense of purpose.
Okay, and that yearning for purpose, is that what makes someone susceptible to extremist ideologies?
Precisely.
Okay.
They offer a warped sense of belonging,
Right.
a cause to fight for,
Right.
a way to make sense of the world.
Yeah.
And that's where Reid's conversion to Islam becomes crucial. It offered him some solace initially,
Right.
but then took a dangerous turn.
Okay, so how does someone go from finding comfort in a religion to using it to justify violence? That seems like a huge leap.
It's about manipulation.
Okay.
It's about twisting and distorting religious teachings to fit an extremist agenda.
Right.
Sources point to figures like Abu Hamza al-Masri at Finsbury Park.
Right.
These radical preachers preyed on vulnerable individuals like Reid,
Yeah.
feeding them a narrative of hate and violence, a distorted version of Islam that justified jihad, and martyrdom.
And Reid, already searching for direction and meaning, latched onto that message.
Yeah.
It's almost like a predator finding its prey.
That's a powerful analogy.
Yeah.
And it highlights the insidious nature of radicalization.
Right.
It's not always about brute force.
Right.
It's often about subtle persuasion,
Right.
exploiting vulnerabilities, and gradually drawing individuals into a web of extremist beliefs.
So we've got this troubled past,
Right.
the conversion to Islam,
Right.
the influence of radical preachers.
Yeah.
But was it just ideology driving Reid?
Right.
Or was there something more, some personal anger or resentment fueling his actions?
That's a critical question.
Yeah.
And the answer is, it's rarely just one thing.
Okay.
It's a convergence of factors.
Okay.
In Reid's case, along with the ideological indoctrination,
Right.
there's evidence of deep-seated anger and resentment towards the West,
Right.
particularly America.
What was that anger rooted in?
He repeatedly expressed a belief
Okay.
that America and its allies were responsible for the suffering of Muslims worldwide.
Okay.
He saw his actions as a justified response to perceived injustices, a way to strike back at the enemy.
So it's this toxic cocktail,
Right.
ideological extremism mixed with personal grievance.
Yeah.
And that's what creates the potential for violence.
It's a dangerous combination.
Yeah.
The extremist ideology provides the justification, the framework for action. And the personal grievance, the anger and resentment provide the fuel, the emotional intensity that drives them to act.
Okay, and then we have to factor in the power of group dynamics.
Right.
We talked about Reid's connections to other extremists.
Right.
Sajid Badat,
Yeah.
Zacarias Moussaoui.
Okay.
How much did being part of that group shape his behavior?
Group dynamics play a huge role in reinforcing extremist beliefs.
Okay.
Being part of a group provides a sense of validation, a feeling of belonging.
Right.
It normalizes extreme views
Right.
and creates pressure to conform.
Right.
In Reid's case, he wasn't just exposed to radical ideology.
Yeah.
He was surrounded by individuals who shared and reinforced those beliefs.
So it becomes a self-perpetuating cycle.
Right.
The group dynamic amplifies their shared hatred, strengthens their commitment to violence,
Right.
and makes it harder for anyone to break free.
Yes.
They create their own echo chamber,
Right.
their own reality.
Exactly. It's like a feedback loop. Pushing them further down the path of extremism,
Right.
they become more isolated from mainstream society, more distrustful of opposing views,
Yeah.
and more convinced that violence is the only solution.
Okay, and that brings us to the question of premeditation.
Right.
We touched upon this earlier.
Right.
The fact that Reid planned this attack meticulously,
Yeah.
even conducting that reconnaissance mission on El Al,
Right.
that's not something a lone wolf acting impulsively would do.
No.
That suggests a level of organization, training,
Right.
and perhaps even direction from others.
Sources support that idea.
Yeah.
Remember, Reid spent months training in al-Qaeda camps in Afghanistan.
Yeah.
He was learning bomb-making techniques, practicing his skills,
Right.
preparing mentally and physically for his mission.
So he wasn't just a guy with a grudge who decided to lash out.
Yeah.
He was a committed terrorist, willing to die for his cause.
Right.
And that level of commitment, combined with the planning and training, makes him even more dangerous.
Absolutely. It challenges our assumptions about what a terrorist looks like.
Right. Yeah.
Reid wasn't a hardened, battle-scarred fighter.
Right.
He was a seemingly ordinary young man who had been radicalized and transformed into a weapon.
So we've got this potent mix of factors at play.
Right.
A troubled past,
Yeah.
a search for meaning,
Right.
exposure to extremist ideology,
Right.
personal grievances,
Right.
the influence of a radical group,
Yeah.
and a disturbing level of premeditation.
Yes.
It's a recipe for disaster.
It is.
But is there anything we can learn from Reid's case
Right.
that might help prevent others from going down the same path?
That's the ultimate goal, isn't it?
Yeah.
And it starts with recognizing that there's no single profile of a terrorist.
Yeah.
It's not always about poverty or lack of education.
Yeah.
It could happen to anyone from any background
Right.
who becomes vulnerable to these extremist ideologies.
So what can we do? I mean, it's not like we can read people's minds and stop them from becoming radicalized.
It's about being aware of the warning signs.
Okay.
The changes in behavior, the rhetoric, the isolation.
Right.
It's about fostering open dialogue,
Yeah.
challenging extremist narratives.
Okay.
And creating a society where people feel valued and connected.
So it's a complex problem
It is.
that demands a multifaceted approach. It's not just about security measures.
Right.
It's about addressing the root causes of extremism,
Right.
fostering social inclusion,
Right.
promoting critical thinking.
Exactly. It's about understanding the psychological and sociological factors
Right.
that make individuals susceptible to radicalization
Okay.
and working to counter those influences.
Okay, so we've delved into the dark side of Richard Reid,
Right.
the motivations and influences that shaped him into a would-be shoe bomber.
Right.
But his story doesn't end there.
Oh.
His attempt, even though it failed, had a profound impact on the world,
Right.
especially when it comes to airport security.
And that's what we'll explore in part 3.
Okay.
We'll examine the lasting legacy of Reid's failed attack,
Okay.
the changes it sparked in airport security measures,
Okay.
and the ongoing debate about balancing freedom and security in a post-9/11 world.
Welcome back to the final part of our deep dive into the Richard Reid case.
Right.
We've gone from a seemingly straightforward story of a failed shoe bombing
Right.
to a deep dive into radical networks, psychological complexities, and the chilling reality of modern-day terrorism.
Absolutely.
It's been a heavy but essential exploration,
Yeah.
and now we need to shift our focus outwards.
Okay.
Reid's failed attempt may have faded from the headlines,
Right.
but its impact continues to shape our world,
Yeah.
particularly when it comes to airport security.
It does. It's true.
It's true. Every time I'm standing there in my socks, shuffling through security, I can't help but think, thanks, Richard Reid.
Right. Yeah.
It's become this strange ritual of air travel, hasn't it?
It has, and it speaks volumes about how a single event, even a failed one,
Right.
can have profound and lasting consequences.
Right.
Reid's actions exposed a critical vulnerability in our security systems.
Yeah.
And the response, as we've seen, has been global and enduring.
But the big question is, are we actually safer because of it?
Right.
Are those long lines, the pat-downs,
Yeah.
the shoe removal, the scanners,
Right.
is it all just security theater,
Right.
or is it truly making a difference?
That's the question that's been debated endlessly since 2001.
Right.
On the one hand,
Yeah.
the enhanced security measures implemented after Reid's attempt
Right.
have undoubtedly made it more difficult for terrorists to smuggle explosives onto aircraft.
Right.
But as we discussed earlier,
Yeah.
it's a constant arms race.
Right.
Terrorists are always adapting, finding new methods,
Mhm.
new materials to circumvent security protocols.
So it's like trying to patch a leaky boat.
Yeah.
You plug one hole and another one pops up somewhere else.
Exactly.
Oh, yeah.
And that highlights a critical limitation of a purely reactive approach to security.
Right.
We're always playing catch up.
Yeah.
Responding to the last threat rather than anticipating the next one.
Right.
It's a constant struggle to stay ahead of the curve.
That's what worries me.
Yeah.
Is there even a way to truly win this game?
Right.
I mean, short of turning airports into fortresses,
Right.
how do we balance the need for security with the desire for,
Yeah.
basic freedom and convenience?
That's the core dilemma, isn't it?
Yeah.
Finding that delicate balance between security and liberty.
Yeah.
And it's a conversation that extends far beyond airport security.
Right.
It touches on surveillance, data privacy, law enforcement powers. It's a constant negotiation between collective safety
Right.
and individual freedoms.
And it feels like we're constantly being asked to give up a little bit more freedom in the name of security.
That's the slippery slope argument.
Yeah.
And it's a valid concern.
Yeah.
Every time there's a new security measure proposed,
Yeah.
there's pushback.
Yeah.
People worry about their privacy being invaded, their rights being eroded.
Right.
And it's a conversation we need to keep having.
Right.
We need to be vigilant about protecting our freedoms
Right.
while also acknowledging the very real threat of terrorism.
Yeah, it's a tough balance to strike.
It is.
Nobody wants to be the next Richard Reid statistic.
Right.
But nobody wants to live in a police state either.
Exactly. And that brings us back to a crucial point.
Okay.
The evolving nature of the threat.
Okay.
Richard Reid wasn't a highly trained operative.
Right.
He wasn't part of a complex hierarchical organization.
Right.
He was, in many ways, a lone wolf,
Right.
inspired by extremist ideology
Yeah.
and radicalized online.
Right.
And that's a trend we've seen accelerate in recent years.
Yeah.
The threat is becoming more diffuse,
Right.
more unpredictable.
So it's not just about catching the bad guys anymore.
Right.
It's about understanding the factors that lead to radicalization in the first place. Right.
Precisely.
Okay.
We need to be looking beyond the immediate threat
Right.
and addressing the root causes of extremism.
Okay.
It's about fostering social inclusion, promoting critical thinking,
Right.
challenging extremist narratives online.
Yeah.
It's about creating a world where fewer people feel alienated and susceptible to the lure of extremist ideology.
That sounds like a monumental task.
It is, but it's a challenge we can't afford to ignore.
Right.
Security measures are essential,
Right.
but they're only one piece of the puzzle.
Right.
Ultimately, the most effective way to combat terrorism is to prevent it from taking root in the first place.
So as we wrap up this deep dive into the Richard Reid case,
Yeah.
where does that leave us?
Sure.
What's the takeaway for our listeners?
I think it comes down to awareness, understanding, and engagement. Awareness of the evolving nature of the threat,
Right.
understanding the complex factors that contribute to extremism,
Okay.
and engaging in meaningful conversations about how we balance security and freedom in our society.
Richard Reid, the shoe bomber, a name that conjures up images of fear and vulnerability. But his story, as we've seen, is far more complex than that.
Yes.
It's a story about the allure of extremism,
Yeah.
the fragility of security, and the constant struggle to find a balance between safety and freedom in an increasingly uncertain world.
And it's a reminder that even in the face of such challenges, there is always hope.
Yeah.
Hope for a future where understanding and empathy triumph over hatred and violence. A future where we can all fly freely without fear.
Well said. That's a powerful note to end on.
Yeah.
And to our listeners, thank you for joining us on this deep dive.
Thanks for listening.
Keep questioning, keep learning, and stay safe.